Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks, Alan, for joining us. And I just want to give a slight and tiny preamble here to what we're going to do. This is a free-form conversation. These students are all in a class on a graduate class in digital citizenship and intellectual property. They are currently in the middle of a collection/portfolio area with intellectual property, copyright, Creative Commons. So it's a good time to talk to you about that. So far, we've had in meetups Jim, Gardner. Did we have a third one? I'm forgetting now. Maybe the first one was just me, so that's boring. And the nice thing about these conversations has been I don't think that we've actually, beyond the preamble, had to use the term digital citizenship even once. Mm-hmm. We just talk about the cool stuff that people do on the web and the cool ways we live online and how technology kind of affects our lives and education and have fun with it. So no theorizing allowed here at this point, I think. At least not on that exact topic.
It's never a threat with me, Chris.
I know. So let's go ahead and start with it. Quick introductions from the class, what you do, and maybe why you're here. So let's start with Valerie.
Okay, I'm Valerie, and I just started in the ONID program, so the online masters, or the Masters in Education, Online Innovation and Design, just last semester, and I did teach international relations and comparative politics and stuff for UAA, and then for another school before that. So this is just to kind of use up my free credits, so I'm enjoying taking the classes for my education degree. So.
Cool. Nice to meet you.
Excellent. Tatiana.
Well, you caught me off guard. Hi, I'm Tatiana. I am an instructional designer. I live now in Portland area, but I used to live in Alaska for 20-some wonderful years. And I am in the graduate program as well. For the official line is professional development. I think it's a really cool program too, and I like the fresh perspective and non-theorizing aspect of it. That's it.
Great.
Hello, Portland.
Philip, can you hear us? Do you have audio?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Yep.
All right. Yeah. I don't have a video camera at the moment, but my name is Phil Peterson. I just got hired on out in the Yukon-Quebec School District. I decided to take this course because I thought it was an interesting title. I was curious about what the course would entail, and I still had 9 credits of classwork that I needed to fill up for my graduate degree. So here I am, just learning about how we can use technology in education. I've learned a lot so far. Excited to learn a lot more.
Excellent. And you're sounding good from wherever you're connecting from, Philip. Noelle.
All right, so I'm in the ONID program, and I'm a new computer science teacher at a very small junior-senior high school in Talkeetna.
How small? How many students?
We've got 200 kids, give or take. That's 6 through 12, though, with 3 communities putting in their kids.
Wow.
We bus them for a while.
Yep, that's small. I suspect that, Philip, your school is probably, well, yours is probably larger, huh? How many students do you have, do you think?
As far as I know, my classes are between 7 and 11 students each. We don't have too many students out there, but it is the largest school in the Yukon-Quebec district. So.
What school are you at, Philip?
The school out in not Minto. That was where I was last year. Hoostia this year.
Oh, cool. Nice.
All right, Linnea.
Okay, my name is Linnea, and I am in the final stages of my PhD through Colorado State University. My PhD will be in public communication and technology, and it's actually in kind of more in the communication studies, journalism department, so a little more kind of theorizing there with those particular degrees. But I am taking this course, and because it really is a great way to learn how some of those topics we've discussed in my PhD program apply within the context of online learning. And so I've been enjoying seeing how those connections can be made this semester.
Excellent.
Cool. Which CSU in Denver or
In Fort Collins.
Fort Collins? Okay, cool.
Yep, yep. So I was actually just there last week, so I was able to visit some faculty and get a status on my progress, and so it's good now to be back. I live actually right now. I'm conducting my research in Alaska, so
okay, cool.
It works well.
And didn't you go to CSU, Alan, or have some connection with them?
I did a talk there. There's a guy, Remy Holden at CSU Denver, who's doing some really interesting work with games, digital storytelling, annotation, etc.
That's right.
Awesome.
All right, and Aaron?
Okay.
There we go.
I'm Erin. I'm a high school English teacher in Fairbanks, and I'm in this class because I'm working on my Master's of Secondary Education, and I have, after this class is over, hopefully if I pass, I'll just have 6 credits left, and so this is one of my electives, and I'm really just enjoying everything, and I think it's going to help me a lot in my classroom, especially dealing with, all the stuff that I deal with as an English teacher, but then also just as a high school teacher and all the social aspects that I have to deal with kids there, so.
High school teacher, very brave.
I agree. So, Alan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you're doing, whatever you want to talk about. I will say that I've kind of prepped the students by just saying basically that you're one of the kind of most extraordinary makers of things and sharer of the way you do things, but I think it's true. You've been doing it for a long time. I actually knew Alan without knowing I knew him back in the Macromedia Director days when there was a Macromedia Director list, and then...
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
I know. It's such a strange thing. And then reconnected, I don't even know how many years ago now, but one thing that's always struck me about what you do and what's interesting is that you just almost relentlessly share not just the stuff that you make, but the way that you make it. And you've built this body of work that's, I think, pretty amazing. And obviously, kind of what you do now is built on that continuing recognition. So maybe tell us a little about what you do. And I'd be interested also, like, what keeps you doing it? Why is your tagline going to become, I think, I love sharing?
Yeah, I spilled something on my T-shirt. I have this Creative Commons I love sharing T-shirt. So I have another Creative Commons. It's my new wardrobe. I was telling Valerie, I grew up in suburban Baltimore. I think it was 10th grade, and it's gonna become this old person talk. My school had a computer science class. I didn't even know what computers were. I didn't have a computer, and so we got on a bus and we would drive once a week to the other side. I can't remember the name of the high school. There's one high school in Baltimore County school system that had a mainframe computer, and we would take our stack of cards. And we get to run maybe one run, maybe if you're lucky twice, and then you get your printout. And so that's how I learned to program. And I kind of I like the challenge, like the logical challenge. I was kind of a math nerdy kid. And so when I went into my for my undergraduate degree, I went to University of Delaware. I didn't know what I wanted to study. And my sister had studied computer science, and she got a good job, so I thought, well, maybe computer science. And I took a year of it, and I hated it. It was just this abstract, pointless, unapplied thing, doing things because you had to solve some algorithm. And I had this vision of, like, working. I got to see, like, my dad arranged for me to visit a possible summer internship at some corporate programming thing place, and there was this giant room full of people with no windows, and I had like this panic attack. Well, as much as a 19-year-old does. Like, I don't want to do this with my life, and so I wanted to bail. And in the great wisdom of university advising methods, when I went to the counselor or whatever, the advisement department, this was their suggestion, and it actually worked. They said, just go through the course catalog, find an interesting subject, and take a class. So chemistry, maybe, biology, the sciences, and I got to G, and I got to geology, and for some reason I remembered, and I still have this copy of this 1973 National Geographic about plate tectonics that I remember fascinated me for some reason. I took geology and I fell in love with it. I was the kid in the front row. I read the whole textbook and I switched my major to, I went from a major, I had to convince my parents, I switched from a major that has a definite career path to one that doesn't. But they let me do that. And so I'm trying to fast forward. I ended up coming out to Arizona State for my master's degree, and they saw I had this computer experience in 1987. They had just gotten this lab full of Mac Pluses, those square little squat computers, and they offered me, you said, instead of being a TA for class, why don't you run the computer lab and try to create some instructional programs. I started using computers in my research, and now computers made sense because I was applying it to my work. And then I was halfway to a PhD. I'm trying to fast forward this. I had another panic attack in a canyon in New Mexico where it's like, oh my God, I'm becoming a specialist in pyroclastic rocks. And it just felt way too narrow, and I couldn't do it. And so I decided to go, I was going to go for a high school certification to teach high school science. And I just happened to go to the office of the local community colleges, the Maricopa Community Colleges in Phoenix, and I was in their central HR department looking for teaching jobs, and I was actually in the wrong place. They do all the part-time hiring out at the colleges. It's a 10-campus system. But I'm like looking at the job listings, this is how they did jobs, in the early 90s. They were pieces of paper on a bulletin board. And there was this thing called Programmer Analyst Instructional Systems, and I didn't know what that was. And I'm reading, well, they want someone who has a little teaching experience, a little programming experiences, and I was like, oh, what the hell? I'll apply for this job. It's like the first formal job I ever applied for, and I went through the process, and they hired me. So what I'm going to say is like, that is the extent of my professional training. You guys have way more academic background than I have, and so I kind of stumbled into this, and pretty much I got some lucky timing. I started in '92, and in '93 I had done some stuff on the internet as a grad student, some research things. So I knew about email. I helped run a listserv. I did some stuff with FTPing and doing some visual stuff on computers. But I had this awareness that the internet was this way to communicate, and so my first 3 months on the job at Maricopa, they left me alone to try to learn. So I was teaching myself HyperCard, but this is where I want to get to the sharing part. What I found was there was this site at Stanford called the SUMEX AIM FTP Archives, and people would upload little software things. I was doing HyperCard stacks that they were working on, and they would share them. And I found out I could download them and I could learn from them because they were unlocked. And so that was how I learned things. Really, from the beginning, was off the internet, and it's still how I've learned everything that I do today in terms of programming and dealing with technology. Is every day I'm like, well, how do I do a ternary logic operation in PHP? I don't know this stuff, and so I'm looking it up, and it's not like it just comes to me, but really everything I've been able to figure out and to make a career of has come from other people sharing their stuff. So that early experience in '90 says, I want to be part of that. I want to give back, and so that's been sort of like my modus operandi. Is that like I don't gain anything by restricting access, and so it's it's not like stuff I have necessarily has like intrinsic dollar value, but I don't know that, and so by not caring whether it has a value, like not thinking like I can make money off of the stuff I share, it's like I have no loss if someone does use it, and maybe if they make money. So when I teach my media students, I used to try to start with explaining what Creative Commons was and why sharing is good, and I really met these blank stares from these 18, 19-year-old students, and really they would say things like, why should I give my stuff away? Someone's going to take it. It's always, I love this one, and this is the myth. Someone's going to take my stuff and make $1 million off of it. And I hate to tell you, professional photographers struggle to make any money off of their photos. The money is not in the media. And so I stopped trying to make a case for sharing ahead of time because most of my students had no experience and no context. And so what I would do in my storytelling class was through the semester I would expose them and have them go to places that openly license their content. And a couple of them would eventually start to realize, wait a minute, I'm getting some benefit from what other people shared. And so that may have shifted a couple people's opinions. It's still a hard case to make with people, you know. So if I just try to explain what the virtues of sharing are and how I have gained from it, people may say, oh, that sounds interesting. You've been lucky, you know. You shared all your photos on Flickr, and once you got invited to go to Iceland. That's very nice. But it doesn't really mean anything to people until they have that first experience of like sharing something small and getting some feedback. So it's you know, for blog posts and they get a comment from a complete stranger, or the common thing in many classes where you're studying an artist or famous scientist and that person actually finds your student's blog post and comments back in. That is like a priceless moment. And so the more opportunities that I can set up for that happen, the better off for my students.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I think part of what, obviously we tackle this because it's a meta issue in this class, because this class, as the students get to kind of do their own thing, is a meta class about the class. So it's a weird thing that way. So you get to approach it both directly, thinking about copyright and intellectual property and fair use and Creative Commons and sharing, but I'm trying to approach it through kind of the same lens, which is trying to have people do that and then hopefully see the value that comes from that. And I think related to that is the fact that most of the people I know who are either happy, or maybe it's a stretch to say, but find the most happiness and satisfaction in technology and education, this whole area, are the ones who are coming at it with their interests intact and their passions, that this is a way to help mediate and facilitate that, rather than the scads of unhappy people who are trained in instructional design to be in instructional design, to do instructional design, but don't bring any other passions to it. And I think that's related to that intrinsic desire to share. So it's interesting to hear that.
Well, at the same time, like if you ask a room full of people, you know, do they believe in the power of sharing? It's like no one's going to say no. I mean,
Right.
you know, they can tap into what they remember as being a kid and, you know, sharing their cupcakes in kindergarten. But yeah, I mean, you know, Chris, I've done these talks where I ask people and I share a lot of my what I call my amazing stories, and it's like things that have happened by virtue of sharing. And one time it was for Alec Cours's his first ETMOOC, which was an educational technology MOOC back in 2012, I think. And I did this online, and I kind of did the Dave Cormier style thing where I put a question on the Illuminate whiteboard and asked people to anonymously respond and asked, you know, what the barriers were. And I'm glad I kept a screenshot because it's immensely valuable. Almost everybody's comment were based upon kind of a low self-esteem-ish type things, like my stuff is not very good, my stuff is not sharing, oh, it's not as good at person X, I'm afraid my department will criticize me. So I think there's a lot of people just self not sharing and saying and just putting up like a wall of no, like it's not worth, and it's not even, it's less to do with people thinking their stuff is going to get stolen. It's that kind of like worry that what if I put something out there that like looks bad or has no value, and so what does that say about me? And I think that's the most prevalent. Yeah, fear of not being good enough. And so who are we, you know, comparing to is the question. So I do as much as possible when I teach my classes. I have this thing where I try to model the importance of screwing up in public. So, like, I don't deliberately, but just because it happens a lot with technology, stuff breaks. The audio doesn't work in the Hangout. I write up the assignment and like there's a broken link or something is messed up, and so I actually find the more I can make mistakes, it kind of drops. Hopefully that idea about teachers have to have this like high level of proficiency in all this stuff, and so. the classic example of making a mistake was that Georgia Tech MOOC, where they had like 10,000 students and they asked them all to do something in a Google form. That Google form blew up because there are too many people using it, and basically they were like, oh, this is embarrassing, and they shut down the class. And so it was an educational technology class, and so to me, like, if you're teaching educational technology, you got to show that this stuff is going to let you down and it's going to break, and that is not the problem. The problem is not recovering. And so in 2012, Jim Groom and I were co-teaching in person at Mary Washington a digital storytelling class, and we got all our students to set up their WordPress blogs and their domains. And the first or second week of class, some hacker named Omre hacked all their blogs, replaced their blogs with this black screen that says Omre 5847. And so we're like, this is a disaster, right? But we're like, okay. Well, we had a message to students, and basically they had to, reinstall their WordPress. They hadn't lost that much work, but we turned Omre into a character. And I still have the Twitter account that I set up. I would taunt the students and myself. So to me, the lesson was like, okay, something bad happens. How do you recover from that? And so I think this cycle of like some small like mishaps. On the live audio radio that we do, we call it futzing in public. You're like, can anybody hear me? Is this thing on? The mic doesn't work. And so, obviously, it's a thing to get. It's hard to get comfortable with, like, because no one really wants to look like you're not proficient with the technology. But my philosophy is, if I tell them that right away, then I can only exceed an expectation. And there's a lot of fear of like messing up and not being able to use the technology. But yeah, as Tatiana says, that piece is one thing, but like this like comparison that we do to other people, I think it's really detrimental to us.
No, it absolutely is. And I mean, I know I've had this conversation with Gardner, with many people, about imposter syndrome and that feeling that it's even beyond not being good enough. It's that you aren't even really being who you say you are through that presence. And that can be a difficult thing to overcome. I've also discovered a lot that there will be people who say, well, there's already stuff out there about this. Like there can only be one site about every topic on the interwebs, or they don't understand the value of process. But the funny thing is, I know you've experienced this too, I'm sure. Once you lead them into exploring for themselves and they finally get that moment of reflection where they realize, oh, all of these resources I've used were created by these people. They weren't the canonical resources, and all the ways I learned about process came from the people who were willing to share. I think that can really open the door to realizing that it's okay. The flawed stuff, the in-process stuff, the learning stuff. Obviously with digital citizenship and some of the discussions in the early parts of this class, there's that talk about, well, what happens when these things stick around forever? As I'm learning and doing the process, I don't personally feel that's too much of a problem, because as Audrey Waters was talking about in her thing today, decay is really the state of the web, much more than permanence. But all of these kind of create this massive, I think, and so let me throw it out to the students. As some of you have had to share more in this class than you maybe have before. Some of you are continuing on with your projects. What are the things that come to your mind as we talk about these barriers to sharing, or how you profit from sharing? I shouldn't say profit, always has such a negative connotation. Whatever. I'm going to say profit for lack of a shorthand, but you know what I mean. Okay, I know some of you are sharing more than you ever have before. You're getting a benefit from it. Of course, you kind of feel like you have to say yes, but you don't. Linnea brings in a vector about having an author commenting on her blog, which I think is a direct example of what Alan was talking about.
And while they're thinking of their responses, I will say it's not for everybody. It's not like I want to force people to do something that they are not comfortable and not ready to do. So, I try to create like very small, low-risk experiences for people. So it's not like you've got to like just rip open your personality and put it online. That's kind of ridiculous. And I respect totally people's rights to say no. I mean, there's not, and there's more than enough examples out there of, of so much of the dark side. The internet is a really ugly place. It's gotten uglier like in the last 5 years or more. that's another flavor of the citizenship discussion. So I don't want to sugarcoat it for anybody. And also, like, digital storytelling, and I know this, and it's why we think it's kind of a fun class. I mean, it's you get to goof off and you make GIFs and animations, and you get to fabricate things. I think it definitely has a value in learning how to express yourself. But I've talked to people and asked, and they're like, look, the people who are in the the health field is like there's this whole layer of like confidentiality and things they have to be aware of that just don't make it as simple to say like, oh, share everything. So all that stuff has to go into some mix of consideration for what your own situation is. And then there's this whole layer, and still I every time I hear a story from a female colleague or person of color about the stuff they deal with that I don't, I'm horrified, because I mean, there's just a ton of shit that I don't get because I'm a white male, and like I don't know what to really do with the unfairness of that, but try to really understand the reality of that. And so that comes even more into my thinking as I'm talking about these virtues of sharing.
Yeah, and one of the things I said to a few students who were starting this class, because they had reservations about going online in a way they felt was more personal than they wanted to, and I said that's kind of what this class is about, is negotiating that and understanding that you can share from a personal perspective without sharing personally as much about yourself as others might, and then other people rip open their chest and let it all out, and that's one of those negotiations I think that you need to have. But at the same time, I think there is a personal involvement that's necessary for it to really be productive and rich, because otherwise you're just so disconnected from what you're doing. I mean, we don't need we have computers can write computer-generated text. We don't need people to do that. So the person's in there somehow. So you've had some time to think. Anyone want to share about sharing? That sounds so...
Kumbaya.
Yeah, exactly.
Something that's been neat to me, like I mentioned in my little comments, and this isn't a very profound thing, but how I wrote a blog and I've been using this author and assigning him in my classes for the past, close to 2 years. And then this author wrote on my blog, and it was like this biggest celebrity moment. I mean, I'm sure this author is not anything really all that amazing, but I was so excited. And I think, I think it was DRC who, Chris posted the example of DRC wrote a Twitter message where she cited an author, and through that, and that author actually read what she wrote. That's probably been the one advantage to sharing that prior to this class I never thought is, you think of those people that publish books or that are really prominent as these like elusive figures that actually aren't really people, and they're maybe not really people, but they technically are people, and I guess they could read your stuff hypothetically. So it's that's something about sharing that I never really thought of before, about how you could even have interactions, just me randomly sitting on my couch in Alaska with somebody who's actually writing and practicing and doing these things. So that's been something aspect of sharing that I never thought I would experience before.
Yeah, and it's even more exciting because it's totally unexpected. Chances are they're like rampant with imposter syndrome and spend a lot of time with Google search alerts for their name. But it doesn't matter. Like it's better to feel like, oh my God, this person was just stumbling across the web and came across my post. Like I don't care. I don't even care how they found it. But just the fact, and yes, the author, the person is amazing. But I think equally as powerful, and that's why we've done this storytelling class open, is like it doesn't even have to be like an quote unquote important person or celebrity, but just the fact that I'm here in my class in Virginia, and some other graduate student in Tasmania. I mean, just the fact that another person, not even a famous person, read your stuff and has something to contribute, that just goes such a long way. And there's something, there's things you do I mean, something could just happen. You can't really like set this out like this will happen to you if you blog. Like you can't guarantee that. But to me, it's just like it's like a side benefit, and the more you do that, the more you chance, increase the possible, potential serendipity of something like that happen. But it's still like you don't want that to be the reason, or the thing that you aim for. And usually I say the only thing I can guarantee you is like if you never share, then no one's ever gonna comment on your stuff out of the blue.
Yeah. No, and I think you highlighted two separate things that I would be curious for the class to think about. One is you gave the example of somebody who's in the healthcare field and some of the barriers they have for sharing. And then you contrast that with, say, somebody who is a faculty member at a university who is interested in getting tenure and is not incentivized to share publicly because they need to go through journals and other, getting publications that are not necessarily shared in a free way. Sometimes they can be, and sometimes they cannot be. So there seems to be these kind of two different elements to sharing, or maybe even more elements that make it difficult. I guess for me, and I would be curious for the people to chime in. For me, I guess the healthcare thing makes a whole lot more sense than somebody who's a faculty member. But I would love what people had to say about that.
I'm just giving students a chance to jump in if they want. I know I've been doing this for a long time and have watched the changes very slowly with different fields when it comes to being open. That I mentioned open science in here. Yeah, not fast enough, that's for sure. But I mentioned open science because I remember 20 years ago working with American Association of Physics Teachers, and there was this feeling like we don't share anything. We don't share our data because people will take it. We don't share in-progress products, and we only publish in print peer-reviewed journals. And as that slowly evolved, that's come along with individual scientists feeling more and more open to being willing to share and the in-process stuff. But it's going to differ by field with what's going to make sense for that individual to care about and to want to share. One of the things I like about Alan is I have this vision in my mind of like that show The Last Man on Earth, but Alan is like the last blogger on Earth. And he's still blogging because he's doing it for his own reasons. And I think that for me, at least as well, when I'm able to force myself to do it, the act of sharing this stuff with whoever's out there is a way of my learning as well. And so I'm finding and thinking my way through ideas. But you have to be doing it for your own reasons first, and those really vary so much by not just individuals, but also the disciplines they're in and the oversight they might have from institutions. And yeah, it's an interesting subject that way. My feeling has been that people in healthcare are much more resistant generally to individual sharing like that, though they seem to be becoming more open to institutionally sharing of knowledge in some ways, but I don't know. That's just been my impression.
Though a colleague of mine who does a lot of work with health professionals sent me something that Mayo Clinic is doing some sort of like professional program for people who work there to get professional credit for being active in social media. You tweet for Mayo and it actually has some count. I think some of the things are people will say like, well, I'm in counseling, I can't share, or I'm a physicist and I can't share, and so it's and a lot of times it's sharing their most important thing, like you're not asking people to give away their gold mine if it's a gold mine. There's all kinds of creative ways you can share in terms of process. It's not just an all or nothing deal that you've got to give away stuff. And there's with people who deal with the health field. Of course, you're not going to be like sharing stuff about your patients. You take that oath. But and you can't like go out with a video camera on an emergency scene and be filming everything because that's against people's rights. But you could. There's all kinds of creative ways you can go about being able to get some benefit from this network effect and the use of media that doesn't have to do with broadcasting the stuff you're not supposed to.
Yeah, which I think ties into one of the tweets today from Cindy Jennings about your discussion and talking about the thinking behind the process and reflective practice. I mean, anybody can do that because you don't have to enlist those little details. But I want to track back a little bit to something happening in chat here with Noelle mentioning that knowing that the author's out there and might retweet to you or retweet you is a intimidating factor. And it absolutely is. The web's gotten much larger. It used to be that I could almost guarantee that if I started a class out blogging, they would have this experience of somebody coming from the outside. Doesn't happen quite as frequently anymore as there's so much out there, but it still happens. So I'm curious, besides the fact that you're just used to all the authors you like being dead, which is hard to tweet, why do you feel that way, Noelle?
Some of the dead people tweet.
And they're usually funnier than they would be if it was actually them. I think that you just kind of get into a groove, like that. If that's how you've been taught to learn, where it's like, okay, here's your reading, and every once in a while they'll be like, oh yeah, like this author still is alive, and that's even weird for me to think about in a way. Like I wrote my master's thesis on medieval theater. I mean, like, not only are the people who wrote the text dead, but the people who wrote the research on the text are dead. So, or not on Twitter, right? So it's been just getting into the ONID program at least has been a completely different way to engage with texts, because you're not just like discussing it with your class, you're discussing it with the person and all these other people online who have read it. And it's just, I don't know, it is really intimidating for me because I'm still adjusting to it in a way. But I mean, like, I follow Margaret Atwood, and she freaks me out. Like, I'm never going to tweet to Margaret Atwood. Like, she'd eat me alive. So, I don't know.
Hey, maybe she likes gifts.
Yeah, right? You know, that is an interesting thing. I've seen this for a long time with students. I mean, there's a reluctance, even in classes like this one, and sometimes it's a technological misunderstanding or lack of knowledge of how to do it, but students will even be reluctant to link to other students. I mean, they know that will be something that those other students will see because they'll log into their dashboard and they'll see, oh, there's a track back or whatever from this person. Or then they'll write all this stuff about somebody, but they won't link to their Twitter account or link to their blog because, like, there's a reluctance to invite that conversation. And I've certainly realized in my own career, such as it is, that the major way that I kind of learned how things work and got to meet people and connected with people like Alan, like everybody I know basically, is because I was willing to also jump into conversations. So I wasn't just sharing, I was also linking and involving that mechanism, but more importantly, I had to jump into the conversations. I mean, I remember very clearly doing this with certain people because I was so intimidated by them that I just couldn't imagine I had anything worthwhile to say, but I was bold enough or brash enough or drunk enough or whatever to actually say it. And then those conversations just happen, and you find out these people really, you can't interact with them. And to me, that's become a major factor for what is digital citizenship or what is successfully feeling like you can express yourself online. It's not just making and it's not just the sharing, but it's also the connecting with communities and jumping into those conversations. Because there just isn't an entree like in the, you know, the coffee shop where someone walks you over and sits you down, or the party. You've got to kind of jump in.
Oh, cocktail parties, man, the worst. Parties are the worst. I'd rather tweet than go to a party. But you know, it also speaks, you know, somewhat to like how people grow this foundational sense of confidence to do this, and so people are going to be in different trajectories, whether they get there at all or you know. So I think sometimes like asking, especially new students who are in this for the first time. It's a big ask to do all this, and I think maybe, you know, as some of us as teachers sometimes have to think about, you know, tempering the expectation or really thinking about the ask that we do. Again, I'm really a big believer in like stuff that has like such little risk of terrible consequences. You know, and so, you know, that's why, you know, we do all these silly little, you know, picture things, or just to have this like experience of just trying something you've never done before, and find out that people don't like giggle and stretch you, And some people actually, may say something nice about what it is. But at the same time, if no one ever responds to my daily photo challenge, it's not really a tremendous loss. And so we're really like invested in getting some of this validation, like in terms of getting people to read or respond to our stuff. But I mean, and we for my primary purpose is the audience or getting. It's a nice thing when it happens, but really the whole sharing and blogging thing is just, for me, I just found it's a way for me to think in terms of being able to have these ideas somehow extracted from my head and put in some place. I mean, and I had a little conversation with Laura Gogia from Virginia, VCU, about this. She says, well, it's not exactly the same as just doing it in a private journal. So, there is this aspect of doing it in public because of this thing that we fear of, the risk. And so it's this tension between this, like, oh my God, what if people feel like I don't know anything about, X? But if I don't know how to turn that around and say, what if someone does find out you know a little bit about it, and then they're able to help fill in some understanding, or to say, like, I don't understand that either. Let's do something about that. So I think we're always trying to fight this sort of like this demon of self-criticism against until we have a positive experience, it's totally in our head about the worst thing is ever going to happen.
Right. And as Tatiana mentioned, you have to overcome that kind of, where are your manners? How come you're jumping in here? And in an effort also not to sugarcoat these things, the vast majority of people I've tried to have conversations with or just joined into the conversation, which blogging and Twitter made much easier for me because I'm the same way. I won't do it at a party. Most of them are great. There's a small percentage that are not so great and will be actively not so great towards you, and that can be a really hard thing to deal with, at least for me. It's hard to let it run off my back, so it does happen occasionally. It's not all roses. I think, yeah, Alan recently called someone a world-class wanker, I think, that
Who was that?
Yeah, we'll keep that to ourselves. But it was a shared experience with someone that way. And that they actually are people is important, because one of the things I was told a long time ago, and I didn't really understand it for quite a while, was as a writer, they said the worst thing you can ever do is meet your writing heroes, because what you'll find out is not only are they just people, they're often really not very good people. And you just have to learn to separate some of that and let that go too. So and then the discipline of sharing. And again, I'm not just saying this, but that's one of the things that amazes me about you, Alan, is how you just do it so regularly and so often. Like, you're so productive. You go to your blog and there's a million posts there about interesting things, and you just keep doing it. And so there's discipline and habit and all kinds of things in there, but that's a big aspect.
I don't know where it came from, but like somehow, just like when I get something that I'm thinking about, and a lot of times I'm thinking away from the computer, it's like I have to get it out. I have to write it, and so it's just become like an instinct. But really, I mean, my entree has been photography, because I've been doing daily photos now since 2008, and so it's my sort of thing to do as a discipline every day, and just as a personal challenge to see if I can once again find something interesting in my 1/3 of an acre that I live on, and to me it just works out so well to be looking at things outside, to be taking pictures, and then to spend my hour or two in the evening editing and writing little captions for that. To me, it's the most fulfilling thing I do, even before I share it. I mean, it's just that as a discipline, and there's some really good questions there about feeling connected. I think there's some aspect about trying to do some things that maybe we're not sure we can do. I will still say, and Nancy White will yell at me if I say I can't draw. But I try, and I sketch and I do things. But I know people who are fantastic visual artists, music. I know people. I can tell my friend David Kernahan, can you riff off of me the theme from Mission Impossible? And he'll pick up his guitar, and in his head, it'll just emerge this song that he didn't know. And so it looks intimidating. Like I could never do that. But like you don't know that until you like do some little bits of tries. And so what DS-106 has done is, I think it gives people a place to try some things again that again don't have like this tremendous cliff of despair if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's always frustrating after a class like this is many of the students will naturally just let go of a lot of this. They'll go on, they'll be busy with other things, other faculty may not, promote it or whatever the case might be. And that's sad to me. It's a loss because it's a loss of the place to reflect. It's a loss to themselves, but more a loss to us and to me because of that part of the community. So that aspect of kind of habitual practice and getting it under your fingertips, anybody in a traditionally creative art knows that that's probably a key to at least being a maker is being willing to have that kind of habitual work and to do it every day. Your daily create, the daily photos, whatever it might be. So I hope that that's something that at least, and at the same time, it's in opposition to my idea that I will never put metrics in my class, right? Like I won't make you blog every day or comment 25 times, because even though that would make people practice, it's just not something I'm willing to do. So people have to adopt it on their own. And I want to connect this to a question that came back up a while ago, but we didn't get to, and that was Linnea asked, "Do you view the stuff you share as still yours?"
Yeah, I'm like thinking about that. Like, what does it mean for it to be mine? And I mean, most of my stuff is photography, but my writing, boy, I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I don't. I mean, what does it mean to own something? I took a picture today. What did I take a picture of? I should pull out my camera or say. I'm trying to think when I did my walk what I took a picture of. Well, I take a lot of pictures of flowers, and so like the flower grows in my yard, so it's sort of my flower, but they're wildflowers. They kind of blew in there. I got a hollyhock. I don't know where that came from, and so this idea about owning is pretty interesting. So to some degree, it's like yeah, I guess there's some amount of like, if I take a picture and I post it, there's like a billion pictures of the same thing, but that's my only one. So and that's my instance of it, and and at some philosophical sense, I don't think I own it. It's but I have some bit of like my observation or my take on something in the world. In a way is mine, but like it doesn't become important for me to own it. And music is a little bit easier because most of music is cover versions. There's only so many chords in the universe. But do I own it? I'm going to really be thinking about it. Does it matter? Yeah, actually, it doesn't matter at all if it's mine, because I'm not really, I'm not trying. If I really wrapped up in owning it, then I have this idea that there's a reason for it's better if I do have control over it than if I don't. So yeah, I mean that idea about owning a piece of media or creation, in the way is I sort of stake my claim. So when I post my pictures on Flickr, it's there. So yeah, here, this came in really handy. I don't even know. This doesn't even explain. This probably doesn't even answer the question. But when Iceland beat the UK in that surprise match, a friend of mine in the UK tweeted this picture and said, "This is where," and there's the name of an Icelandic player. This is where he grew up. And I'm looking at this picture, and for some reason, it's really familiar to me. I've been to Iceland twice, and I'm like, that looks really familiar. I think I've been there. And so I go back in my timeline on Flickr, and it's not the town or the house where this Icelandic football player grew up. it's a museum. It's a fishing village on the northwest side, and I had this exact same picture, and like the fact that there's this little bit of recall because I had this picture in my memory and I could find it in my Flickr. I, it's sort of like, yeah, I own this sort of representation, and it's somewhat embedded in my memory. But when I do something like if I edit a video, or if I record some music and I publish it, or if I write a really long blog post I think is important. To me, I sort of stake not my ownership, but my instance of expression when I put it on my blog. And it's not to say like I own this thing, but sort of like at the time I sort of own my own ideas about it. Wow, that's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. I mean, it's right at the crux. I mean, this is coming out, as I said, I'm sure, because we're thinking about the very idea of intellectual property. It's something that is so often taken for granted that there's this thing called intellectual property that's not tangible. But we've really built this apparatus and fiction around this idea of ownership of these virtual things, and so it's a natural question, but it's a hard question. I'll put in my usual plug when this kind of idea comes up for Lewis Hyde's book, The Gift, which has been really interesting for me in thinking about this, just in talking about gift economies, but just the idea of giving and what that means, which I think it ties, flip side of the coin of the sharing and ownership parts. So I'll bring that up.
Even the expression intellectual property is kind of an oxymoron, right?
Yeah, I mean it's like putting an apple on top of an orange and saying they're going to be the same thing now. We just legally decided that. It's a strange thing when you start thinking about it. So you can get pretty far afield with that. But because I know some students need to leave in 5 minutes, I don't know if you can stick around a little longer if there are some questions or some more questions. But I wanted to tie two things together here. Linnea made a nice segue because she says, do you make a living off the things you share? And I know you haven't answered that, but also ties into what you are doing, particularly the Creative Commons certification and what you're doing with that. So
yeah, no, I don't make a living. I think I've sold 4 photographs in my lifetime, so enough to buy a week's worth of groceries, maybe. So the things themselves, I don't make money off of, and it's kind of it's the model of a lot of the work I've done with WordPress. I write out exactly how to do everything I know how to do, but not everybody can sort of sit down. So like I sort of offer a service of being able to do the things that I write about and give away, or maybe to add something from my experience. So no, I don't make a living off of anything that I share, and so that kind of takes away from the idea of it being a piece of property.
But at the same time, I think through that sharing and through becoming part of communities, that's led to a lot of the things that you've been doing, especially since I think you left academia proper, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't have a full-time job, so I've been self-employed for the last 3.5 years. And all my work has come from connections and people that I've been in the same sharing circles with who they don't just give me money, but they sort of know of what I can do, and they invite me. Chris has had me come out to Fairbanks, and my work with Gardner Campbell has led to a couple, contract projects with his organization, and it's the Red Hat thing, sort of like Linux is free and give it away, but not everybody can sit down with that stuff and use it. So you sell sort of like a consultancy of being able to help people with stuff that is quote unquote free. The Gift. I'll put it down. Who's the author?
Lewis Hyde.
Okay.
So why don't you tell us about the Creative Commons certification, since everybody's been using Creative Commons licenses and reading about what they are and that kind of thing.
Oh, it's kind of funny. Like, I got a DM from a colleague I know for a long time, and she said, "Oh, I heard you were doing about this Creative Commons project. Can you answer my question about the no derivatives license?" And so, and it's funny because there's some things in Creative Commons that are very explicit, but everything is so gray. And so, and the other thing is, of course, no one's out there enforcing it. There's no Creative Commons police or legal force that comes down and says, "Chris, you didn't use the right license. And so it is kind of a gift system in a way of like people honoring the licenses in the way that they use other people's work. A lot of people break it, all the time. And I honestly will admit I use stuff that's not openly licensed sometime, and I have some questions about things like stuff in pop culture, whether we don't have a right to remix it if we're not trying to sell it into something. Because I was asked last year by Paul Stacy, who works for Creative Commons, to become part of this project that I'm on now, and they've had interest from a couple organizations in government and libraries to be able to offer a certification in Creative Commons to people who work in those sectors. And it's been interesting talking to the government people, because I didn't really think about it's sort of like a totally different realm from what we deal with in education. There are, I think the Bureau, it's Labor and Department of State have actually come up with sort of like departmental decrees that any of the projects that they fund have to be shared under open, or sometimes I think with Labor it's explicitly Creative Commons license. So all the grants and projects that they give out to people and the contract work that they do, now people within these government agencies have to have an understanding so they can answer questions and do consulting because of this requirement. And what happens is right now they just call it Creative Commons and say, like, can you do this under a non? And so in a way we want to, it's to sort of like help spread the awareness and raise the knowledge and understanding level of Creative Commons. At the same time, like, I have no idea what a certification actually means. Chris knows I hate badges, so it's so forming right now. So one of the things I've been asking people to do, and Chris has been completely refusing my request, is I'm asking people, like, instead of explaining what a Creative Commons certification is, like, tell me what you think that would mean to you. I mean, first of all, what does Creative Commons mean in your work? But if there was a certification available, would it mean anything to you, and what do you think it would take to get one? So it's been an interesting sort of design approach to get these ideas from people without anything being strictly formulated. So, but a year from now, it will have to be there will be something there, and so that's my sort of role in the project, is to help work with a team that's figuring out how these things can be structured, how can they be offered in flexible ways, how can they be done in ways that people can sort of, other people can do these certification programs without Creative Commons having to do them all. But I struggle a lot with what it means to have a certification, because it's not like Creative Commons wants to be authenticating people, because when you want to be that sure, you end up doing things like standardized testing. And so it's an interesting thing that we're working to figure out right now, is to, how it can meet those needs and yet still be done in a way that people are doing real work. A total, like, David Wiley's like ideas about not doing disposable assignments is just so important. I use it all the time. So those are those assignments that you do in class that no one cares about, and you're never going to look at it again. It's just an exercise. And so part of it is trying to think about ways that people can do real and meaningful work in the process of whatever education they're in. So if I'm getting a Creative Commons certification, if I have to do a bunch of things because it's on a curriculum, as opposed to I can do something that matters in my area of interest, I can apply Creative Commons, or in my work as in a government agency. That's where I want to be with this.
Yeah, I was surprised when you first started talking about it, because it just seemed the idea almost seemed anathema to your position on a lot of things. So I trust that if anybody can figure out a way to do it right, it will probably be you and the Creative Commons group. But it also made me think about Audrey Waters' note today about how students don't care about keeping their stuff or archiving their stuff or having this presence if you assign things that are meaningless to them and don't have any value. So how you'll proceed with that is interesting. And DRC actually did a video for you.
Yeah, I know. I thank you,
So-
Darcy. That was great. I don't even know this person. She's a librarian. That was even better. So if anybody else is interested, I will give you a large virtual hug. Even you, Chris.
And I will give you 1 million points.
A
Do a video for Al.
million points.
If and I know some people have to go. If you do, feel free. Alan, do you have another couple minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I want to get, since one way of thinking about the certification, like Creative Commons, as you're describing it, in which you're not getting to an authentication point, because I agree, then you get things like Microsoft certifications and things that strike fear in my heart. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you could kind of say, if I go through this and I get this thing, isn't that kind of badging this person? Yeah. And so Tatiana says, why do you hate badges?
Oh boy, I don't think they mean much. And when you look at a whole bunch of badges, I understand the incentive, and like I don't rule them out. But like I don't believe in the badge as an endpoint to what's done. So what I would like to see perhaps is, rather than saying Creative Commons asserts, Chris, that you are proficient in Creative Commons, is that you produce some body of work, of activity that can be publicly seen, that you are asserting that you have this knowledge of the different licenses and the idea of what a commons is. And so it's not like certifying that definitely we can say as an organization that Chris knows Creative Commons. Chris is going to say, look, I don't know it, but sort of I understand the principles behind it, and this is the way I apply it in my work and the things that I do. Here are clear and demonstrable examples that show my understanding. So to me, I would like to see more of an assertion than a certification. And no one's going to be there like grading or putting this thing on some crappy rubric or assigning points. But I don't know exactly how it's going to work. Yeah, a portfolio approach. And I think there is room for some of both. People will need some representation of this certification, whether it's something they print out, whether it's electronic. It's just that I don't really believe in sort of like all the stuff being stuffed in a bunch of metadata. That match. And at the same time, I'm interested. I recognize the need for people to sort of be able to have some demonstration, be able to say these are my skills in a certain area for things that necessarily aren't outside of formalized programs. So that's some of the big reasons why people are interested in badging. So things that they can do is volunteers or hobbies or stuff that's maybe not directly related to their work, but to say like, this does factor into who I am and what my skills are. It's just not in anybody's curriculum that gives out degrees. And so I think there's a place for that, but I don't think that can be everything. And so I do believe sort of the portfolio, whether that's a blog or what I maintain to say, this is the work that I can do, and so that's been my approach to the way I do my stuff, is I write about everything I do, so there is sort of like a public record of it, and let people figure out whether it's any good.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense to me. I'm obviously less triggered by the word badges. I feel like you're probably triggered by it the same way I'm by the word rubric, so I appreciated that. Like, I figure badges don't kill learning, people kill learning or whatever. And probably the challenge is on that now once you have this figured out, you're probably going to get a box of 3D printed Creative Commons assertion license badges for you. Seems inevitable. But I like the idea of assertion because then that also ties to the fact that you have the agency of the person and what they're representing, what it means to them, and then that leads to me to manifestos and good things like that people should have when it comes to the ideas of sharing in Creative Commons. And, okay, yeah, sorry, I'm just looking at the chat to see if I'm missing anything here. So much to talk about, so little time. I want to throw out a last round here of questions, comments. DRC, do you want to comment on your Creative Commons video experience? Or Tatiana, do you want to grill Alan about badges a little bit? Or
No, she's on to e-portfolios, and I agree.
Okay.
I mean, I think system e-portfolios are just crap. So, I mean, a person should own their portfolio. It shouldn't reside within an institution. And I would like people to sort of, be able to say, this is my representation of who I am in the world. And so, while DS-106 is a digital storytelling class, the underhanded thing is helping people, as you're doing by having your students blog, is to sort of shape their own digital presence in the world, rather than having it be shaped for them or done in some kind of box thing. So, I have sort of a bad e-portfolio, and they've been around like since I started the field. And I remember going to like workshops in the 1996, and people they're talking the same stuff they're talking today.
Yeah, I feel like, for a while there was that battle cry of, we don't need LMSs because the web is the LMS. We don't need portfolios. The web is the portfolio. That's what you're making with your domain of your own and the stuff you make. And I top-down, institutionally driven portfolios. I mean, I'm in a program that has that, and it's terrible. It's like you have to go do your time in prison for a month a year dealing with the portfolio system and the tracking system. So it's terrible, I think. But
yeah. When I talk about it, I have a pair of pictures where I show like this really kind of bland hotel room, and like if I show you the hotel room, it's got a real ugly, a real spread and a terrible lamp, and there's nothing on the walls. And then I contrast it with like a picture of some, teenage bedroom with posters on the wall. And, not to say that everybody needs a teenage bedroom as a portfolio, but to me, like, the way you feel in that space is very different, because it's not your space. And so, yeah, in the hotel room, you don't care as much if you spill something on the carpet. And you don't really expect to have anything like inspirational on the walls because it's not your space. And I think that personal sort of amount of investment in your space, it changes everything. Maybe it's more work, or maybe you have to clean your room or decorate your room so much that you get tired of decorating it. But sort of like that's sort of like human personal relationship to our digital space. It matters so much. I mean, it gets back into the fear and judgment place as well. But if it's not my space, if it's not my hotel room, it's a disposable, it's a disposable thing I did there.
Yeah, I mean, and you can see why these things spring up. I mean, as twisted as it might be because of the ideas of tracking and management and data gathering, but to me, it's so weird. These systems, and then they say, oh, but we have sharing mechanisms and we have ways to make parts of it open. And it's like aliens or high-powered monkeys have interpreted what sharing means and applied it to the system, because it's not anything like sharing the blogs. It's like LMSs have blogs and wikis inside them by some weird perversion of the words. And if you see the same thing with portfolios, I'm sorry, it just drives me crazy. I'm going to get off in a soapbox about this. So clearly I'm not supporting those top-down portfolios. I think people should make their stuff and put it out there, and that's what the people here are doing, thankfully. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead, I think. Last thoughts before I close it down. Questions? Noelle, DRC? Valerie, you've been very quiet. Going twice?
Don't put pressure on them, Chris.
Exactly.
Yeah, put pressure on them. Put pressure on them.
Yeah. Well, thanks all of you who stuck around as long as you could. Thank you, Alan, for your time. And as usual, I think it was a really interesting conversation that only about 10 minutes of were what I was planning, which is the best kind of conversation. Like the rabbit holes are the best thing. So I'm enjoying it.
And thanks a lot. I feel like I was talking a lot, but and really, I'm really thinking hard about that question, Linnea, about the owning stuff. I might be blogging about it, but
I'll have to check out your blog to see. It's on.
Now the pressure's on. That's one. You should never say I'm going to blog about something, because then you
I know,
have to.
Yeah, exactly. I wrote a couple things in my blogs now that at the end of my blog entry, like, oh, I want to read more about this, and then you almost feel like, oh gosh, now I need to go back and actually do it.
My audience is expecting it, and like, you know.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks, Alan. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Thanks a lot, folks. Good night.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Alan. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.